Welcome back to the Group Practice Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Polaris Healthcare Partners, where we leverage decades of healthcare and business experience to drive growth in successful group practices just like yours. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur and you're interested in building, scaling, or exiting your group practice, you've found not only the industry's leading resource for business education, but a team of trusted advisors dedicated to helping you achieve and exceed your goals. In short, the team at Polaris creates clarity, confidence, and results. I'm your host, Jamie Falash, and the Group Practice Accelerator podcast is on the air. Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining me today for another episode. So I want to start with a few questions that will help us kind of get into our topic a little bit here. And although I can't see you, you can still play along with my little quiz. Okay, so first, raise your hand, unless you're driving, keep your hands on the wheel, if you're an owner running the show in your business, meaning you own the whole pie, you own the entire business. Next question. Raise your hand if you've ever thought about offering some kind of ownership opportunity to an associate doctor. All right. Last question. Raise your hand again if you've ever lost a good associate because you didn't offer them a path to ownership. I know you're out there. Yikes. So we all know that recruitment can be really tough. So finding the right cultural and philosophical fit is really hard. We know that. So when you've got a good associate who fits the bill, you better be prepared to tackle an even harder step beyond recruitment, and that's retention. So we know without a doubt, according to the data, and you can check for yourself, the new ADA's updated data came out recently, and I'll link that in the show notes. But we know that docs do want ownership. That has not changed. Now, that ownership can come in a lot of packages, a lot of shapes and sizes to fit your specific business and your situation. So if you're not prepared to retain and you raised your hand during my little quiz at all, then this episode is definitely for you. And maybe it's for you if you didn't raise your hand, because I can assure you, if you want to grow, this is a conversation you probably need to hear. And I'll just bet you start to think about ownership opportunities a little bit differently. And because I rely on my amazing teammates here at Polaris, our subject matter experts, really, for best practices, insights, advice, all of that, I've asked my colleague, Mark Flock, to join me today. And as you all know, Mark's a pro at all aspects of equity and partnerships. Mark, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Jamie, for having me. Pleasure to
You're
be here.
welcome. Well, good to see your face. And I want to jump right into this. But like I said in the intro, we know it's not always about recruitment, the retention piece, and how you offer or don't offer equity in your business can have a huge impact, right?
Correct. It can be it can be impactful for sure. Yes. Yep.
Well, and I want our listeners to stick around to the end, because you told me a story the other day about
Mhm.
an incentive equity or earned equity program that really kind of skyrocketed somebody's associate performance. So stick around to the end, because I'm going to have Mark tell us that story. But maybe we should start with some of the basic principles or things that you share when you're talking to owners when they're considering partnership opportunities, or even if they're not, go ahead and comment on that too, because some might not even have it on their radar, and they need to have it. So maybe start with some of the basics.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jamie. And I talk to all different types of owners at all different stages along the way, and sometimes it's very proactive, which is great. I love it when I have a proactive conversation with an owner around partnership, and sometimes it's very reactive. So the one thing that I mean, there's a lot of things. There's probably a handful or two that I'd recommend on the front end, regardless of what you're looking at here, what you're considering is first, having a plan. That's the most important thing. Whether you have a doctor or associate or associates or executives that have already addressed or expressed ownership, or you do not. It's great if you do not at this point, because you want to understand what that plan is, what you're willing to offer, if anything. It doesn't have to, like, every doctor that says that they want to have partnership doesn't mean you should give them partnership if you're unwilling to give them a partnership opportunity. I hate to say it
Yeah.
like that, but that's really true. I mean, it really depends on what you prefer, what you expect, and them kind of meshing into your vision and your mission long term with your business. Also, I tell doctors you kind of have to be flexible, because at some point you may have black and white expectation, but you might find the right person that's a great partner that's just a little bit off course of that a little bit. Do you want to offer something for them? Does it solve their needs as well as yours? But it might be a little different than your initial plan. Are you okay with that? So being flexible is extremely important too. But once again, not going against these certain black and white things that you said are hard, fast rules from day one that are important to you. Owners have to have the question, in my opinion, up front as they're bringing doctors on, because you need to understand what the associates, what the executive expectations are if you have COOs or CEOs that are expecting it one day. If you don't address it, then it probably becomes an issue. And when it becomes an issue, you're you're behind the ball and trying to create something that you probably would have not have done if you're proactive and were going along your plan from day one. So, good questions might be, I mean, what are they expecting? And then a good follow up would be why they're expecting that. I'm more curious about the why, if they're expecting partnership. And then what does that partnership mean to them, along with why? So it's not just, hey, I just want to have my name on the front door, or hey, I just want to be a partner, or it could be, hey, I want to build wealth for myself and my family. Okay, that's a great answer. Or, hey, I want to take over some of these leadership responsibilities. I see you do X, Y, and Z. I'd love to take over Z. I'm a really good fit for that, and this is why. Great answer, in my opinion. So,
Yeah,
because they're
exactly.
thinking about it not just with the money aspect, but they're thinking about it with the responsibility aspect, which is great too. And then, what do they value most in being a partner in the business? That's a really important one. I like to have doctors ask, because you kind of hear what their answer is really what they're looking at, what they think partnership is. You know what partnership is. You've all been through it. The good, the bad, the ugly, the difficult days, the long evenings, the stress of debt. They have not, most likely, at this point. So I think you got to be careful that you should not always be selling them. They need to be selling you on why they're a fit for a partner. That's one thing I think
That's
a lot of
fair.
owners get get incorrectly. Like, I need to give this person partnership or I'm going to lose them. Well, you're the one offering this benefit, and they're the ones that are hoping for the opportunity, but they must earn that opportunity, in my opinion, to have that seat at the table one day. So keep
Yeah.
that in mind, and that's something that makes some owners squeamish sometimes, and is having that conversation. It's very much, you're selling them the opportunity, and they have to earn it. So keep that in mind.
Well, you're
Um,
at the
Go ahead,
same
Jamie.
time
Yeah.
you're selling an opportunity, you're giving up what some doctors feel like is control, which is, I think, maybe not so accurate, especially with smaller amounts of incentive equity or any kind of equity. Um, it just depends on your structure. But if we take this back to the foundational principles that you're giving us, I think also one of those has to be know yourself. First of all, are you going to be able to relinquish some of that control? Is that for you? But if you plan to ever get out of the chair and grow your business, if you're adding locations, you better be looking to add some great partners in your business. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just that simple.
To your point with control, I hear sometimes with associates, well, I want to have decision making power. And that can be very difficult for owners to hear. And that person, unfortunately, may not be the right partner for your business, because you may want to remain in control of the business. Now, they can become a partner in the business, but they may not have decision making control. In some cases, it depends. We can help create that. We can also create certain solutions where there's not necessarily having voting rights, so there may not be the control factor, but they have the equity, they have the financial, they have the income with distribution factor with it, depending on the equity type and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
the a couple more things, Jamie, with respect to that initial question that I think are important is, don't. This is one I hear a lot, because I usually come to the table after this happens. Do not make promises without knowing the outcomes. And when I say that, and I say that in a sincere way, meaning I get a lot of situations. Well, I promised this person when I hired them,
Mhm.
30% equity offered in a year from now. Well,
Yikes.
have you vetted that person out? Have they truly earned it? Do you know what 30% is going to cost? Do you know what 30% is going to cost you as an
Yeah.
owner? And are
What's the
you able to
value of your
offer
business a year from now?
exactly. So you don't, I don't like firm promises without knowing
No.
the outcomes and having someone evaluate those for you. That's really important. Um, and it's yeah, you gotta be careful of that. There's a lot of different things that can go into it, and you should definitely have a plan in place, before the need arises, especially as you're growing, not after. It's easier to set the foundation and use that for growth and have people kinda jump in along the way versus going back and trying to recreate something midstream. When
So
they're demanding it, you have your back on your heels, and it's more difficult to meet everyone's needs at that point.
yeah, that's true. Being proactive
Mhm.
about it. We've talked a lot about being proactive on this
Yeah.
podcast. Like, just be prepared. Explore your options, if nothing else, before this becomes an actual issue that you need and probably would want to manage very well. But I have a quick question for you around some of
Yeah.
these basic kind of principles. Where do you find docs are in their journey? Like, let's talk about the early days. Where do you find that they are that they kinda need to think about this seriously?
But when you say early days, you mean
Yeah,
location, 3 locations or
yeah, location-wise.
yeah, I would say a lot of them. They have maybe 1 or 2 associates, at least 1 or both of them have expressed interest in ownership. They don't have a plan in place, they're not really sure. They've told 1 or both of those doctors, "I'll give you 20, 30%," which once again is perfectly fine as long as you understand what you're giving up and you're okay with that.
Yeah,
So that's when I at least go back and say that's completely fine. It's not a bad thing as long as you're understanding of what that could cause and you're fine with that. So and also the associates are okay with that too. I think that's most common where they're at, or they've lost associates, and it's just a revolving door, and they're trying to find a way to remedy that, and retain more of those associates. And partnership's not the end all be all for that. They must be partnership worthy, as I call it, to receive that opportunity. But there's a lot of different ways of achieving certain things with associates to get them what they need, but it depends on where you are in your business as you're growing it, what you feel comfortable with. Then it also depends on that doctor or associate, soon to be partner potentially, what their interests are and aligning those interests. If they're not aligned with yours, I wouldn't make them partner. I wouldn't give them an opportunity to be partner. Just
no,
my opinion on that. So it's not a partnership fixes everything type of conversation. It can be motivating, it can incentivize them, it can retain them. There's a lot of positive things it can be. But if they're not the right person and you give a substantial amount to them or promise a substantial amount to them, it could create a lot of headaches for you too. So it's not a give it to anyone that asks type of thing. It's important and it should be treated very diligently with how you offer.
yeah, a lot of stars have to align to make that a good
Mhm.
fit, and it happens often. However, you need to, give yourself a gut check and make sure that you do have the right person that's gonna, match with you culturally, philosophically, treatment modality-wise, all of that, and that their goals are not just, "Here's where we are, I'm happy with my performance, I'm not looking to grow." All that's gotta line up. So, talk to me about options. What do you I mean, there are a ton of options, I know, but if we can kind
Yeah.
of go through some of those without, getting into a 4-hour podcast on each of each of those, because we could. We could.
Yeah, and we've talked about a lot of them in the past. I'm only going to name a couple, maybe at a high level.
Yeah,
But really, it comes back to, like I said, Jamie, and even on previous podcasts, it depends on what moves them. The person you're offering it to, what they can afford, if anything. In some cases, what those associates or providers, value with respect to partnership, which why that previous question I mentioned earlier is kind of important. And then there's numerous options depending on what those answers are, along with what you're willing to provide or give. Legal structures also can play a role in what's able to be offered,
oh, for
if
sure.
unwilling to be changed. So all things need to be evaluated before promises are made. Not to go back to
Yeah, we're gonna
that part
keep
earlier. So
coming
'cause
back to that.
yeah, because you can say, "Yeah, I definitely wanna do an earn-in model," and that's great, but your legal structure may need just a slight tweak or change, and you wanna know that and wanna understand what that is before you make a promise to that point.
Yes.
So, at least to the associates, and that's something we help clients go through and evaluate and discuss with attorneys and things like that. So,
Mm,
I mean, there's traditional buy-in models. That's what probably 95% of the market understands. I'm going to buy 20% equity into the business for an X number of price based on evaluation. Here's what it comes with. And it's all spelled out in legal documents. I also
Yeah.
work with some clients on what we call structured buy-ins. It might be tiered in a sense where it's kind of somewhat earned a little bit, where they might, buy in 10% now or 5% now, depending on the size of the business. And in a couple of years from now, we'll do an updated valuation, and you have an opportunity, if you do X or Y, to receive another opportunity for buy-in. That way, your cap table is not changing dramatically. It's just whenever those buy-in moments are happening only. And it's kind of for that top tier associate or partner that you expect to do that. And you can do that a couple times. It's
And
not
that's
giving up
probably
as much up front, and it's kind of like letting them grow with you, but it's also proving themselves along the way. So there's
yeah.
different ways of doing that and kind of accomplishing that, and you still have that. I would say the simplicity of a buy-in type of situation. And then there's
Yeah.
earn-in models. The two more common ones are restrictive stock units, or RSUs or RMUs, depending on the legal structure. RSUs were primarily drive individual performance for an incentive. Then you have profits interest units, or PIUs. That's typically driving an individual office or group profitability. And that's where you can incentivize them there. I mean, there's other forms, Jamie, that's, like equity grants or non-qualified deferred compensation plans, or it's commonly referred to as like phantom stock,
Hmm.
that can also be offered, and just all different types. It just depends on how you want to incentivize. Like I said, going back to what are they willing to do, if anything? How do you want to reward them? What are you willing as a business? Where's your business today? Where's your business going to be tomorrow? That also plays a huge factor. And then a lot of times, you want to work with a firm when you're developing this that's, I wouldn't say equity agnostic is probably the best way to put it. So they can give you the best solution for what you want, they want, and create that specific to your situation versus, companies out there that will, they could offer maybe an earned equity type of solution only. That's all they do, or they just do buy-ins. Hey, we do equity buy-ins only, and that's it. Well, they're probably going to push you that direction because that's all they can offer. Or that's all that they suggest, or that's the norm of what they do. It doesn't matter to us. We try to fit what works best for you and your team and create something specific to that. So that's why
Yeah. And
it's
that,
extremely important
well, and that
to
can
do
be
that.
really tough. You've got $350,000, maybe plus, of debt as a
Hmm.
as a recent student. Buy-in might not be something that is possible for you. So I like to hear that there are incentives, there are earn-in models that can kind of remedy some of that. Um, Now you mentioned performance, and this
Hmm.
is where I want to tie these together for our listeners. So earned equity, incentive equity, as you called it, RSUs, PIUs, all of that. So when we're tying performance to those kinds of things, what have you seen work well? What should doctors be focusing on when considering an earned equity type of solution?
Yeah, so I could take it
Sure.
20 different routes, Jamie, on
Mhm.
that, but I think it depends on, like I said, if you have an RSU model, it's really their individual performance, and they're getting chips along the way for exceeding annual expectations with respect to collections, or, a benchmark associated with that grows a little bit each year over year, but they don't have to go to the bank and take out a loan in order to become a partner. They can
Right.
become a partner by exceeding expectations on an annual basis, and then continuing to stay at that group or office long term, because there's a vesting schedule associated with an earned equity type of model. Whereas profit centers units, they might be growing a location. They're the anchor doctor associated with location A. And as they grow the value of that location by increasing revenues, increasing profitability, whatever it may be, with the help of the current ownership and group, they start to earn, a percentage of the upside, essentially, of that individual location. So it depends on what you're looking to incentivize. There's success examples with both of them. If you're looking for a story or something like that, Jamie, I can share one. But it's
Oh, we'll get
yeah,
to that.
that's pretty much it there. Yeah, that's you're always asking, so I figured I'd just go down that route.
Yes, absolutely. No, but it's good that there are some options out there for doctors. And like we said at the beginning, one solution is not a perfect fit for every business. There's a lot to consider there. It
Correct.
depends on how you're structured, all of that. But let's tie that to performance in terms of let's look at clinical capabilities. So let's narrow it down to that. So we see that when people are coached properly, they're growing in terms of their clinical performance, case acceptance, and all of that. Let's tie that to performance. What have you seen out there in terms of how well that works?
Yeah, and that's it depends on the individual. I mean, I think it's important, I mean, not just when you're offering an earned equity type of solution and providing some type of coaching from a clinical perspective, but if you just think about it, if you have doctors, and let's just say you're flat at $1 million producing doctors, and you can come in and gain a higher case acceptance rate, or prepare better for the cases that they have coming in, or have a better confidence level of of explaining, the options a patient may have, which obviously leads to a higher case acceptance rate potentially, and going through that and truly just being an educational individual for them, and then also just scheduling, is extremely important too. Is your scheduling laid out in the most efficient way? Well, that's something obviously, Polaris does with clients and clinical coaching, but if you're not doing it by yourself or doing it on your own, it can lead to flat production year over year or minimal increases. However, if you have someone that can go in there and take your $1 million, let's just say average producers, and turn them to 1.4 million within a 12-month period, which is not unreasonable with certain businesses, depending on where you are. Well, if you have 10 providers, that's extra dollars in collections that you just gained overnight, and you didn't add a single full-time employee on the provider side of things. That can be game changing for a business. Heck, even if it's just two associates, you increased $800,000 in revenue
Yeah,
without
right.
adding an associate. But what if you had 10 associates that did that, as well as adding two? What does that look like? Because that's probably what your growth model looks like. So it's extremely important to do that. And then for those individuals, just think about it. I'm making X percent on my collections, or potentially adjusted production, or whatever that number is, from 1 million to 1.4 million. If it's 30%, I'm making a lot more money.
Sure,
That's
that's
and going to
meaningful.
it's an extra, it could be an extra $120,000 on top of
Yeah,
that. That might allow me an opportunity to earn equity in the business. So it's extremely motivating for that individual. At the same time, this isn't an end all be all, like they will stay with you forever. But if you have an earned equity model that's allowing them to become a partner, that's kind of, allowing them to have partnership. They're now on the LLC agreement if it's an LLC business, or really call it operating agreement. Let's just put it that way.
yeah,
Operating agreement that they're tied to and becoming a partner. And they've been with you for, say, 4 years now, and gone from a $600,000 producer to a $1.6 million producer, and you've helped them get there. They might realize that the grass may or may not be greener elsewhere because of what you provided to them, given them the opportunity. You've done all this for them. Why would they look elsewhere? At that point,
exactly.
they may think they can go elsewhere, and I've seen this happen where that exact scenario, they've looked elsewhere, and guess what? That new employer only gave them the opportunity to produce 800,000 to $1 million, as an example. They made a lot less money. Their rate was maybe 2% higher, on their collections rate, but they were given $600,000 less. And they're like, I now want to come back 6 months later because I didn't realize how good I had it here. Create a
Exactly.
business like that, and where it's like, even if that one person leaves and they come back 6 months later, that's a great situation for the rest of your associates to see, in my opinion.
Yeah, it sure is, and I had motives for asking you this question because I just had a
Okay.
conversation I had a conversation with, our Polaris clinical coach, Vivek Solanki, the other day, and he and I were talking about building doctors and getting them, from that, 650 production to or 5K a day, as we like to talk about that number, and how that can really impact them when it comes to ownership in a business. So I love to hear that you're kinda hearing the same thing, and we know that that mentorship can create those notches where it gives motivation then to the associate to work a little harder, expand their skills for the benefit of their own pocket and the patients, of course. We can't leave that out. But
Yeah.
again, the financial motivation can't be ignored.
Yeah, patient care is
So,
always extremely important, but I think if you're doing all the right things and growing as an individual, and you're better at educating them and have a higher case acceptance rate, you're doing something right on that. And I think that just trickles down to the patient, at the end of the day. So that's important.
yeah, partnership. Big motivator. So, with that, we're gonna get to that story that I was telling our listeners about. So, and
Yeah.
you have a good story, about a client that you worked with in particular that you started to tell me about, where an equity partnership model actually really kinda skyrocketed their business after it was implemented. Can you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen numerous situations, when I roll these out, and this was, I think the one you're referring to is an RSU or restricted stock unit model,
Mhm.
and there was associates that were, to your point earlier in our early conversation, were not able to take on debt, just because of education. They all had about 100 to $400,000 in student loan debt. I think across the board, it was I think 5 or 6 associates that I rolled it out to. I rolled it out not quite 2 years ago. It was about 2 years ago to them initially. It was accepted well from them. A lot of questions, like always. A lot of the questions with the 6 associates in the room were, I'm expected to do a little more than I did last year from a collections perspective. I feel like I'm at a plateau. I don't see how I can grow and produce more. And honestly, that's common, especially when you're throwing in a collections number that might be a 10% increase. For some of these individuals, might be a 15% increase, and they're kind of taken back by it, or maybe even just what they did last year in some cases. And they're like, "Well, I can't do more than what I did last year. I'm at I'm at the end." And I almost guarantee you, for most people, that's not truly the case. The conversation I had is, hey, if you're able to take on an extra, like, like take on some continuing education, be able to do a different procedure that you can now incorporate into business. You're currently working X number of days. It might be 3 days a week. If you obviously work 3.5 days a week, I don't necessarily push for work more days, but become more effective, become more efficient with the days, and talk to the scheduling coordinators. Like, I'm only seeing 8 patients a day, but I have capacity to see 12. Like, can we do those type of things? And it's also, fee schedule increases. If the business increases their fee schedule 4% year over year, I would expect my associates to do 4% at a minimum year over year more, because I'm doing the same amount of things just at a 4% higher rate potentially. Depends on insurances, a lot of different things. So had that conversation. They were kind of skeptical, a little bit, as always. It's kind of the case. They started in this program. It was 2024 was their full year. So we did a cap table update for them at the beginning of this year. It was interesting to see all 5 of those associates exceeded the goal, and 2 of them, or actually 3 of the 5, were well below it to start with. One was only a year and a half out of school, and it was a pretty lofty goal for some. And it wasn't just an increase. I mean, I was trying to look at their numbers. I mean, the average increase year over year was about 350,000
Wow.
for each of those employees in collections. Yeah,
That's
so
what we
it
wanna
wasn't like a
hear.
it wasn't like a $50,000 increase, like, "Hey, congrats, that's great." It was a $350,000 increase, which really kind of equated to almost a 25% growth year over year, which is
So
crazy to say.
so all
Well,
those
go ahead.
doctors that didn't raise their hand because they
Yeah.
haven't considered this is
Well,
what you need to listen to.
yeah, I mean, a lot of these doctors went from, like 1,300,000 to 1,600,000, just overnight. Some were 1,100,000. You're doing 1,100,000 to 1,400,000, 1,500,000. It was kind of crazy to see, and everyone had earned RSUs in that first year, which was really cool to see. And it was one of the greatest, I would say, cap table updates that we had into 2025, but we've seen it in prior years, 2024, 2023, 2022, where, you roll these out and all of the associates earned equity that it was offered to and signed up for. Happens often, but not every time. So those rollouts was a lot of fun, because they're expecting to get, I was expecting to get $10,000, $20,000 worth of shares, but they may have gotten 30, 40. And it was like a huge bump for them. And it was obviously motivating going into 2025. And they all come off the ground running, obviously, and excited for what just happened that they weren't expecting. So they all made more money from it too, as well. So
Well,
it was a
yeah,
good thing. That was
if I'm the
I would say,
business owner, I'm
yeah, it
happy.
was a good business owner was happy. Revenues were up, I think, almost 3 million. So there was also some additional outside help. The owner was also chairside, I think, 1 or 2 days a week, so not full time. But they brought another associate in that's obviously new, that will participate in the program in 2025. in late 2024. So excited for that. And then they also improved profitability a little bit as well. So it was like they had given away a little more equity than they're expecting in that first year,
Mhm.
but they were the real winners, actually, at the end of the day, the 2 owners, because they increased the business valuation much more than they projected initially. So it was a truly a win-win-win for all. Yeah.
Absolutely. Grow your people will grow you.
Yep.
At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. So,
And yep.
anybody that was listening that, again, didn't have their hand raised for any part of my little quiz, maybe you'll think about this a little bit differently and just give it some thought. Give it some thought. It is definitely worth exploring. Well, Mark, it's great to have you on the show again. Good to see you here. I know that our audience really values your expertise and you have a lot to share about partnerships and equity. And there's always an education to be had because there's as many situations for that as there are dental practices out there.
I appreciate it, as always, Jamie. Just let me know when you need me next.
Absolutely. Well, and to our audience, we appreciate that you support us by subscribing to the podcast. And we love the questions that you all send us. So keep them coming and we'll keep delivering content that you ask for. So as always, if you want to learn about any of our Polaris expert advisory services, or maybe there's a topic we haven't covered yet that you'd like to hear about, just go ahead and send us an email to info@polarishealthcarepartners.com, or you can reach us by visiting our website. Click on that Contact Us button at polarishealthcarepartners.com. Thanks so much again for being a loyal listener and subscriber. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share this episode with a colleague and be sure to leave us a rating on any of your favorite podcast platforms. We'll see you on the next episode of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast.